Spying on whales. Having just got back from a dive trip where I got to hang behind a boat and dwarf minke whales spied on me, this is probably a good time to talk about Spying on Whales by Nick Pyenson, which I very much enjoyed. Now, I've read this book more than once. I actually own the paperback, though I couldn't lay my hand on it today. I might have loaned it to someone. I hope they give it back. I've also listened to the audiobook, in which it was narrated by Mike Grady. I've heard from other friends on Goodreads that there's another audiobook which is actually narrated by the author, which might be even better. Mike Grady did a great job, but I think the author often knows it better. So the author for this is a Smithsonian paleontologist, and he talks about whales as well as modern day whales. I think he goes on a Rockwell tagging mission in the Northern Hemisphere, but he also talks about the background of whales, so how all modern whales these days are thought to have evolved from Pakicetus, a fossil that we have, and other evolutionary things. There is so much about whales to cover, and I like the way he does it. This is not a textbook so much. There's a lot of information in there, especially about the fossil marine mammals at the Smithsonian and the various missions the Smithsonian has gone on and his various digs. There's one particular one that I especially liked. It happened somewhere in South America. I think it was South America. Can't pronounce it. It's on the website. The government was building a road, fossils were found, so he went with someone he'd already worked with before in that country to dig them up, and instead of being one or two, it ended up being massive amounts. And apparently it's a major part of the Smithsonian display these days. That was a great story. I don't remember it terribly well. I read this one last in 2020 or 2021. Hope to read it again one of these days if someone gives me back the book. Anyway, it combines personal anecdotes, museum information, paleontology, and modern animal information with history, both recent and prehistoric. So it does talk about the whaling industry, but this manages to never ever be an actually depressing book, which is something that you can get when you're talking about whales and whaling. But his popular science approach to the whole thing makes it realistic and interesting. The physical book has various illustrations, but I don't remember it having any real life illustrations. I think you kind of need to go to the Smithsonian site for that, and I did that while I was reading it the first time. It also talks about Basilosaurus, which is a really bizarre ancestral whale. It's discussed at some length. It was once thought to be a reptile, but was found to be a mammal. And, yes, that's right, Alaska. He went to Alaska and assisted in tagging, which came up for me recently, that how difficult tagging can be. Tagging dwarf minke whales is apparently an incredibly expensive experience and harder than tagging humpbacks, so we don't know as much about their tracking. But it made me think back to Nick Pyenson on a tagging expedition. As far as I can remember, there's kind of 3 parts to this book, and one concentrates mostly a chronicle of whale history in their early development, transition from aquatic animals to terrestrial and back to aquatic. That's a totally fossil record, and it was nice to have a paleontologist describing it. I've heard a lot of it before, but I'm not a paleontologist, so I tend to forget the details. It was good. Part 2 was more about the present, how the whales evolved to become such massive creatures, the blue whale being the largest animal that's ever walked the earth, I believe. Largest animal or largest mammal? Definitely largest mammal. Not sure about animal. Anyway, all these questions can be answered by reading the book for yourself. And part 3 talks about the rather uncertain future. Population rates, climate change, new habitats, etc., etc. In general, I think that there's a lot to be gained both from the audiobook, because for a start, I didn't know how to pronounce all the paleontology names, so the audiobook was great for that. The actual physical copy is good because you can reread things in a way that I personally can't with the audiobook. I have to listen from start to finish. I don't know how to backtrack very much. And I have a different sort of memory for when I read something that's written down and when I read something that's spoken. So it's good to have a combination of the two. There's heaps of information and facts here, interspersed with personal experiences and things about the museum. Do recommend it to people who are interested in whales. I just took several weeks out of my life to try to snorkel with whales, so obviously I'm one of them. Yep, recommended.